Hello fellows, and welcome to episode 10B of Sonnet Sisters. My name's Jennifer, and in this episode I'm going to be going through an analysis of Shakespeare's sonnet number 10. Right then, sonnet number 10. Things are about to get really interesting, and you'll find out why pretty soon. First, I'm just going to go through and do a line-by-line reading, sort of in roughly modern language, picking up on particular words that I found tricky or not 100% sure of the first time round when I read this. So, here we go. Shame on you. Or, if you're capable of feeling the emotion of shame, then for that reason, for the sake of shame, deny that you carry or hold love for anybody. Best, in that first line, means carry or hold. While you yourself fail to prepare properly for the future. Provident is sort of preparing for the future, setting up money to sort you out in later life. And so unprovident is not setting up properly for the future. Accept, if you will, and I will too, I will accept, that you are loved by many people, but it's very clear that you don't love anyone. Because you are so taken over with murderous hate, bracket, towards your potential children or offspring, if you were going to have any, you're sort of metaphorically pre-killing them, so you're murderous because you're killing any chance of having children. You're so taken over with murderous hate that you don't hesitate to conspire and sort of make secret plans, I guess. That's where I got stuck, ironically, on sticks to not. Sticks is, stopping. So it's saying you won't stop. There's nothing stopping you from making these plans. Making these plans that are trying to ruin... Now, there's two things going on here. Trying to ruin your beautiful house, essentially, is what roof means. Trying to ruin your beautiful house. And house can both mean his physical body, the person trying to ruin your own beauty by not putting anything in place for it to live on, but also ruining the beauty and the lineage of your house, your family, kind of like the Starks and the Lannisters, their houses. It's the family that the lineage goes through and the name is carried on as they continue to have children. So it's both trying to ruin your own body and also trying to ruin the lineage of your family and your house, which should actually be your priority to try and fix. Both of those things. Change your thinking so that I might change my mind about you. Whew. Is hate really better living in your mind, living in your head, than love? Fairer lodged. Lodged is like living, like when you get a lodger in to stay in a house. So it's keeping with that house roof metaphor by saying lodged. Is hate really better living in your head than love? Be like you seem to be generally around other people, gracious and kind, or at least be kind to yourself. Have a child for my sake, out of love for me, so that your beauty will live on in your children and also in you. So there you go. That is roughly what the poem means in modern language, or at least that's my interpretation of it, having looked through it a bit closer and looking up the words and doing a bit of research.
What is the meaning of this?
Now, I didn't think it possible, but Shakespeare has really cranked up the dial on the whole shame and guilt versus praise and love thing that he's been using through most of these procreation sonnets. The first stress, the very first stress of the didum, the first dum in this poem is the word shame. I feel like that really says a lot. So it lands immediately on that before you're off. And I feel like that would really get the listener's attention. If you're sort of like, oh, that's another sonnet. For shame. What? Why? Why am I being shamed? And then all of these negative words that get thrown out there. So shame is the first beat. Unprovident, thou none lovest, so possessed with murderous hate. That one alone is filled. Hate, that's bad enough on its own. Murderous, that makes it even worse. Possessed with murderous hate. Flippin' heck. And then he's even put a so in front of that. Not just you're possessed, you're so possessed with murderous hate. I mean, that is just a great 1, 2, 3, 4. That is just a great 5 words in itself right there. Amazing. Conspire, ruinate, which just means ruin, basically, completely bring down. Hate, again, used later. And that I may change my mind. This is a turning point in the procreation sonnets and in the sonnet sequence in general, because this is the first time that Shakespeare refers to himself within one of these sonnets when talking to the subject. So it's really interesting that he says that I may change my mind. I was like, what? Wait, what's he got to do with it? Why would his opinion matter? And this is the question we have to ask. So this is the first inkling that there is something interesting. There's some kind of relationship, however you interpret that word, friendship, or, there's something more than just some guy who was commissioned to write a bunch of poems for this 17-year-old. There is some kind of important relationship between them from the very fact that he said, change thy thought that I may change my mind. And going on then to say, make thee another self for love of me. Again, why does he matter? Since when did the subject, the guy who's refusing to have kids, have love for the poet? It's getting really interesting now. So these are the first little inklings. And the last line I wanted to talk about, because I didn't kind of understand when he says that beauty still may live in thine or thee. Beauty still may live in thine is talking about thine children, because he's just said make another self. So it will live in those little selves, in those little versions of you. You will live on. As he's been saying in the past 9 sonnets, he's been sort of making that point. But to live in thee, again, the whole point that he's been making in this sonnet and in previous sonnets is that you're not going to live forever. Your beauty won't live on, so you better do something about it. So to end the poem on thee is a bit like, well, why, how is it going to live on in him? But this is where I found, through some of the research, a separate meaning to that part. So this is where it brings it round again to having this sort of personal shift and a bit of a personal dig, hoping that his opinion is important enough to change this guy's mind. Because he says, make thee another self for love of me, that beauty still may live in thine or thee. So the idea that beauty still may live is just that it will continue to live. The idea being suggested here is that I'm sure we've all had that experience when you see someone really attractive and you think, oh, I really fancy them. And then just from afar, and then you start to talk to them and they still seem quite attractive, and then they say something either slightly offensive or just something that you really disagree with, and you're like, oh, suddenly you're not as attractive anymore. That's the suggestion going on here. Change your mind, change thy thought so I may change my mind, that beauty still may live in thee. So change your mind so that I still continue to think of you as beautiful. So that's what that line means when it says in thine or thee. It's suggesting that if you don't change your mind, you're becoming unattractive to me. And I would prefer that if you do change your mind, then I can keep thinking of you as beautiful and keep fancying you, or whatever. Interesting, no? Yes. So another thing that I touched on in the line by line is this idea of the house and the importance of lineage and sort of family duty. I talked before a little bit about, the Starks and the Lannisters for any Game of Thrones fans out there. This seeking the roof to ruinate. This is the first time that Shakespeare has kind of heavily brought in this idea of duty to your family. There's been a kind of duty to the world, but that's been more playful because it's like, oh, you owe it to the world because you're so pretty. Oh, the world would be so sad to not have you in it. Whereas this is very specific, boiling it right down. So as well as starting it off with shame, talking about him being murderous and full of hate, he's now also piling on the personal family guilt and this sense of duty. So that's really interesting that it's the first time that has heavily featured in the procreation sonnets. So, talking about structure and rhyme, There's some really great rhymes in this sonnet particularly. When you look at the rhymes and how they match up, there's some really great juxtapositions and sort of balancing off of one thing against another. So at the very beginning, there's two feminine endings, which I'm not going to talk too much about today, but if you want to look it up, go for it. I'm not too sure in this poem particularly, but any and many are feminine endings. It might be suggesting a sort of unsteady start, again, to try and catch the reader's attention, in that they, instead of the line ending on a stressed beat, who for thyself art so unprovident, it finishes, grant if thou wilt, thou art beloved of many. There's an extra beat on the end. So it's said to be a feminine ending. It's called a feminine ending because it's weak. It's a weaker ending because it doesn't finish on a stressed beat. And you know, women, we're all weak. The actual words, any and many, I think that's a great balance there, balance off going on there. Hate and ruinate, again, they're both kind of saying the same thing. Conspire, desire, that's a really interesting one, I like that. Love and prove, love can prove anything. And then the couplet, I love this bit. Just look at those last two words in the couplet. Me and thee. What's that? This is the first sonnet where we start to see a bit of a relationship form between the two of them. Me, thee. I mean, that's great. That, again, like I've said before, sometimes when you read just the last word of each line, it tells a story in itself. Ooh, me and thee is the last lines. Now the couplets always tend to kind of boil everything down from the poem, or the main essence of it, right down to the essential thing that it's about. And the final rhymes always tend to reflect that quite clearly. So it's very interesting that me and thee are the last words of this couplet and the last things that you are going to hear or remember once you've read this through or heard it spoken to you. What does it all mean? So, looking at putting this sonnet into performance, there's so much stuff going on with all the shame. I mean, it's not that unusual actually compared to the other sonnets we've looked at. They've all had this kind of a bit of a guilt feeling, but this one I really feel piles it on. Especially starting off with shame and then, you know, murderous hate, all that stuff that I've talked about. It's really packing a punch. And also the whole fact that the speaker is important in this two-way and is hoping that their opinion will hold some sway in the argument and pull the listener over to their side of thinking. As I say, it's the first time that he's put himself in there as another element to try and persuade the young man to have kids. I was trying to think about who would believe that their own opinion held so much sway for someone, and that they could speak to them like this. It's a bit like I said before for one of the other sonnets, where I imagined a grandmother. I was thinking, who could be so harsh and so loving at the same time? And in this one also, there's a real feeling of disappointment creeping in, which for me, all of these things together, again, tie back in with the family thing, especially because family and duty are mentioned in this poem and the idea of keeping the house together. It kind of took my brain to the Regency period and Jane Austen type customs and expectations of marrying your daughter off. And of course in Pride and Prejudice, Elizabeth Bennet refuses 2 offers of marriage and her mother, Mrs. Bennet, goes crazy at her for denying this because she's worried it's going to bring the house into ruin. She's worried that they will be poor forever, because marrying your daughters off to a rich husband was one way of ensuring that you would contain money in the family. So if you didn't have much money, marrying into a poor family was really helpful and important. So all of these ideas tied in together, and because I remember Mrs. Bennet just flying off the handle and being both hugely emotional and telling people off, and also being like, oh, it's because I love you, it's because I love you. That is the route that I would like to take with this sonnet, because I feel like all of those themes and ideas and emotions and attempts at persuasion and trying to bring someone around to their point of view come out so clearly here in a way that for me really perfectly mirrors that sort of Jane Austen Regency period world. So that's what I intend to do. If I can get hold of appropriate costumes and setting, because those things are not too easy to come about. So we'll see what I can do, but that's the way that I would like to take this in an ideal world. So I hope that you have enjoyed this analysis section with me. If you have any ideas yourself, anything different or anything that you'd like to add, just send me your thoughts in the comments below. Let us know what you think about this poem and perhaps how you would put it on if you were going to film and perform it. You can even just film it and send it in, and perhaps we'll show it at some point. We'd like to do that quite soon. So thank you for watching, and I will see you on Saturday with the performance of sonnet number 10. And then of course on Monday you can see Anna, who will be diving into her first impressions of sonnet number 11. Until then, see thee anon.
What was he on about? My body, mister, come figure it out with the sonnet sister.
Doing an analysis of Shakespeare's sonnet number 10. So weird. Why am I so weird? Such a weirdo.